Hi guys, in this video we're going to look at the AND function. Before we do that, go to Excel VBA SQL.com. There's over 26 hours of free lessons that'll teach you everything you need to know about Excel from the beginner to the very advanced parts of Excel. Put your email in this box and you could receive an email when new videos go up. Okay, so let's get started. So in a previous video we have some data here, this random data that has people's names, street addresses, cities, states, all kinds of data, salaries, a date that we took this data down, phone number, what else, number of kids. And then in the previous video we did these two formulas here. We did this nested if statement to see if it is the target audience and if it's over the threshold. And then we did a simple if statement that says, does this person have more than 3 kids? So those were if statements. And remember what an if statement is. An if statement like this, an if function, has a logical test, and this logical test always evaluates to true or false. And if it evaluates to true, then you're going to get whatever you put here. So if n4 is greater than 3, then you're going to get that'll evaluate to true, and you're going to get the value if it's true, which is going to be yes. And if n4 is not greater than 3, it evaluates to false, this logical test, and you're going to get no. So that's the if statement. Now we're going to look at the AND function. Sorry, I keep saying if statement, but it's a function, the if function. So now let's look at the AND function. So how do we get to that? Well, before I was clicking on this little FX button, but you can also go to the Formulas tab right here and click on Formulas and go to Logical here. And if you go to Logical, you'll see that we looked at the if function. So we know how that works. Now we're going to look at this AND function. And let's take a look. So if I click on AND, the function library up here on this Formulas tab, it has this function wizard that we can look at. And again, let's look at the description. It checks whether all the arguments are true and returns true if all the arguments are true. And then it says logical 1, logical 2 are 1 to 255 conditions that you want to test. And they can be either true or false, and can be logical values, arrays, or references. So basically, all the AND function does is you pass in an argument, and the argument evaluates to true or false, and you could pass in up to 255 of these arguments or conditions. And all those 255 conditions are going to evaluate to true or false. And the AND function is going to look at everything you pass in, all those arguments. And it's either going to return true if all of them are true, or false if all of them are false. So let's take a look at that. We could do this. We could do this right here. So let me insert something here. And I'm going to call this a simple AND. And I'm just going to do this. I'm going to do equals, and then I'm going to write and now notice it asks for a logical argument or parameter, whatever you want to call it. I call them parameters. So if I just type the word true, that is a logical value. And now if I just close the parentheses, so all I'm doing is writing this, equals and true. If I hit enter, then I get the value true. Now why does that happen? Well, because remember what that said in this little box here. It says it checks whether all the arguments are true and returns true if they're all true. And in this case, I passed in a logical value, true. So of course this evaluates to true. It checked if what I passed in was true, and because I just passed in true, then AND evaluates to true. And also notice that you can pass in just one condition. Even though it says and sort of implies two things, you could pass in one if you want. So let's do this now. Let's go back to our formula, and up here, instead of doing and true, let's do and true true. So this is like the simplest and function that you can write. You're just passing in true and false, which are logical values. So what will this evaluate to? Well, what is this function going to do? It's going to look at this argument here, and if it evaluates to true, it's going to say, okay, that evaluates to true, and then it's going to check the next one, and it's going to say, do both of them evaluate to true? And they do. So it's going to return true. So if I hit enter, this returns true. Now if I were to change this to false, then this is going to return false. And why is it going to return false? Because both of these arguments have to be true in order for and to return true. So now it returns false. So that's a little abstract, but this is the real generic way of looking at these logical functions. It's either true or false, and you pass in arguments that evaluate to true or false. So let's look at a more concrete example. Let's say we have two things. We have equals 1 equal to 1 and 4 is equal to 5. Now what will this evaluate to? Well, this condition, 1 is equal to 1, is certainly going to evaluate to true. This condition, 4 is equal to 5, that's going to evaluate to false. So the AND function says both of the conditions have to be true in order to return true, or else I'm going to return false. So this is going to return false because this one evaluates to true, this one evaluates to false. They're not both true, so if I hit enter, you see false here. Okay? Now let's change it. Let's do 1 equal to 1 and 4 equal to 4. And if we hit enter, now they're both true, right? 1 is equal to 1 and 4 is equal to 4. So if we hit enter, then you're going to see true over here. And that's basically the AND function. It's basically this. You have a bunch of conditions, and they evaluate to true or false. And the AND function returns true or false. And it returns true if everything inside the parentheses is true, all the conditions, or false if any one of them is false. So if we put another one in here, 6 is equal to 8, and I could go on, 8 is equal to 8. You could put 255 of these things. These are the simplest tests, just, very simple tests, 1 equal to 1. Okay, so that's true. 4 equal to 4 is true. 6 equal to 9 is false. And 8 equal to 8 is true. So will this return true or false? It's going to return false because this here is false. 6 is not equal to 9, so that evaluates to false. Everything else is true, but it doesn't matter. This is going to return false because and the AND function needs everything inside here to be true. So if I click enter, if I hit enter, I get false. And if I were to make this 6 equal to 6, then everything inside there is true, and so you get true. Okay, so now we've looked at the most generic case. We've looked at a more concrete case like this, and now let's look at a real world example. Okay, so let me I'll keep this here in this column, and I'll just autofill this down in case you want to look at it. And now I'll write another AND function. So what I'm doing up here, if you want to, this workbook is going to be good if you need to reference how do I use functions, because what I'm doing is, as I move along in these videos, I'm leaving the functions that we covered in. So here's the if functions that we covered. Here's the AND function, and I'm going to do another AND here. I'll just put simple AND. And now let's check something with our data. So I told you we do a real world example, and let's do that. So let's check whether Let's check if you, okay, we have all this data. Let me go over here. And let's say you want to do some analysis of people that work at Google. And, or no, let's say, yeah, Google, why not? So what we want to do is say, if we want to find people who work at Google who make more than $40,000 and they have more than 3 kids and their favorite color is green. So how would we do that? Well, you could do it real easily. So first thing, let me hide these functions because we're not going to use them right now. And what we want to do here is Google greater than 3 kids and greater than 40K. So here I want to identify in this column whether this person works at Google, has greater than 3 kids, and makes more than $40,000. So I could do that with an AND function. So I'll do equals and now I'm going to do, okay, do they work at Google? So what I do is go in this employer column, I click on this cell, P4, and I go, and P4 is equal to Google, and then I do a comma because I want to test another logical condition. So this is going to evaluate to true or false, which is what the AND function wants. This will either be true or false. Now I want another true or false statement. So I could do equals, or I could do comma, and then N4, which is a number of kids, greater than 3. So this will also evaluate to true or false. Either the person has more than 3 kids or they don't. So that's going to be true or false. And then I'll do another one on their salary, and I'll say K4. If I click on K4, I'll say K4 is greater than 40, 1, 2, 3. 3 zeros. And this is my AND function, and it accounts for all the 3 criteria that I want. I could put the favorite color in here, but you get how it works, right? I mean, you could put 255 things in here. It's up to you. It's really flexible. That's why these logical functions are really, really powerful. Okay, so now we have our AND function that will tell us if the person works at Google and they have more than 3 kids and they make more than $40,000. If I hit enter, it evaluates to false. And remember why. It's because this AND function only returns true or false. And for it to return true, all of these things must be true. They must work at Google, they must have greater than 3 kids, and they must have a salary greater than $40,000. In this case, it returns false because this is false, and this is false, or actually this is false, this is true, this is greater than 3, and this is true. So we have 2 things that were true. The salary was greater than 40K, the number of kids is greater than 3, but because the employer wasn't Google, it returns false. Now that's what we want. We want to identify employees like this, or we want to identify people in our data that are like this for whatever reason. So now let's autofill this formula down, and to do that, remember, go to the lower right and double click this square, and here we have, you'll see what we have. We have false, 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 false. Here's a Google employee, and let's check. They make more than 40,000, but they don't have more than 3 kids, and that's because this has to be greater than 3. Notice here, they work at Google, they make more than 40,000 up here. K9 is greater than 40,000, but N9 over here, N9 right here, it's not greater than 3. It's equal to 3. So if we wanted it equal to 3, remember, you could just put an equal sign right here like that. But we want greater than 3. So let's keep moving down this column until we find a true. Okay, so here we find a true. Let's take a look. If I click on the formula bar, then these cells are going to be highlighted so we can look at it a bit easier. So this person works at Google. They have 7 kids and they make $42,000. So they just made our criteria. If they make more than 40,000 by $2,000, they have certainly more than 3 kids. They have 7 kids, and they work at Google. So this definitely returns true. So our AND function up here returns true because all these logical conditions are true, and that's what we want. They all have to be true. That's the main point with this AND function. All of these things inside the parentheses have to be true. If any one of them is false, the AND function is going to return false. So if we keep scrolling down, let's see, we have another true here. I'll just put my cursor here. This person works at Google. They have 7 kids. Okay, so there's another person with 7 kids, and they make more than 40K. So you get the idea, right? We're working. We have a function that does what we want. So that's a real world example of how to use the AND function. But in reality, in the real world, you really don't want, I would say 90% of the time, not 90% of the time, but a majority of the time, you're not going to want just true or false here. You're going to want to say something. So now we're going to go into the part of the video where we're going to start expanding on what we already know. So if I unhide these columns, if I just select these columns, unhide them, what we know already from the previous video on the logical functions is that we know there's a function called if, and that will, as we said before, if we pass in a logical test that evaluates to true or false, we can return anything we want. We could return a value if true, and a value if false. So if this test here returns true, we can return anything we want. If it returns false, we can return anything we want. So now here's what really you do in the real world with Excel. Let me hide this again. What we really want to do is put an if statement around this. So here's what you would do most likely in the real world. You would put an if statement around this, and now remember the if statement has a logical test. So what's our logical test? Well, this is our logical test. If, and then we do a test, and what is our test? Well, our test is this AND function. This logical test, remember, has to return true or false, and that's exactly what I'm highlighting does. This AND function only returns true or false. So it fits perfectly in this logical test area right here. So if the person works at Google and they have more than 3 kids and they make more than 40,000, then I can write something. I could say, wow. I could say, wow, you work at Google! Exclamation mark. I don't know. I don't know if I want to write that, but for right now, let's see. What can I write? I could say you are lucky. Maybe because they work at Google, they're lucky. Maybe because they have a lot of kids, they're lucky. So I'll just say that. It's just an example, right? And if it's false, then I could do something else. I could write not too bad. So that's an if statement where I can now do things with this information, because basically this tells me a lot, right? This AND statement tells me a lot. It tells me the person works at Google, they have more than 3 kids, they have a salary greater than 40,000. So I could do anything I want with that information. And that's what this if statement does. It allows me to say, okay, if that information is true, I could write anything I want. So here I wrote you are lucky. Maybe because they work at Google. And then if they don't meet that criteria, I just write too bad. In the real world, you'll do other things. I don't know what, but this is just an example. So if I copy this down, now I see that you are lucky here. This person's lucky because they work at Google, they have 7 kids, and they make $42,000. So maybe we should change something here, because if I'm writing you are lucky, maybe this should be less than 3 kids, because a lot of people don't like. So, and then maybe we should raise the salary. So let's make it 100,000. So maybe this person is lucky now. They work at Google, they make a lot of money, and they don't have too many kids. So I'll say you're lucky. And if I hit enter, let's see what changes. So now this person was lucky. If I autofill this down, double click, now that person has 2 bad there. And let's see if anyone's lucky here. Right here, this guy is lucky. He works at Google. He only has 2 kids. Wow, that's pretty good. And he makes $300,000. I would call that pretty lucky. Oh, but look what here. He is divorced. Now, some people would say you're lucky if you're divorced. Some people would say you're not lucky. So let's add that to our criteria. I'm going to take the standpoint that you have to be married to be lucky. So let's take that philosophy. We can take the other side, but for the time being, I think it's the conservative approach. So let's say that M4 has to be equal to married. Okay, so now we just added a criteria in here. They have to work at Google. They have to be married. They have to make a lot of money, and they shouldn't have too many kids. If that's the case, I want to say to them in that column that you are lucky. Else I want to say too bad. So I hit enter, and now let's see. If I autofill this down, let's go down here and see a lot of too bads, Everyone is not lucky. Oh wow! So in our case, people who work at Google, none of them are lucky. Maybe this married thing caused some problems. So let's try to lower this. Let's try to lower this salary. Let's make it 50, just to see if anyone can be considered lucky. Maybe when you're married you don't make as much money, or I don't know. So if we keep going down here, hopefully we'll find someone. Nope, nobody. Oh, wait a minute. Let's see. Here we go. So this person is almost lucky. I just was scrolling through and I see this. So they work at Google, they make a lot of money, they don't have a lot of kids. Oh, but they have 3 kids, and in our case we want less than 3. So I'll give that person a break. I'll say you're lucky if you have 3 kids or less. So I'll do less than or equal to, and now we'll see that someone is lucky. Here we go. We're going to just scroll down, and probably that person right at the bottom here, this person is lucky. They work at Google, they have 3 kids, they're married, and they make 124. Okay, so that is all I wanted to show in this video. It's an example of the AND function. What did I do? 50K. So this is what we did. We searched our data for people who work at Google, have more than 3 kids, and they make more than 50K, and married. So we have 4 criteria here, right? 4 criteria. We put an AND statement. Remember, this AND statement evaluates to true or false right here. All that I highlighted, it evaluates to true or false. And it evaluates to true if everything inside is true, all the conditions. If one of them is false, one or more of them is false, then it returns false. And how you would use that in the real world is you would put an if statement around it and use it as your logical test. You would go if, and then you put your conditions, and then the true condition, you would write whatever you want or do any calculations you want, or do another if statement, like a nested if. You can remember we saw that we could do nested ifs. You can still do nested ifs here. So formulas can get really long, but they're not too complicated. It's pretty straightforward. You have logical functions that return true or false, And then notice the if statement is a logical test here, the first parameter. And that logical test needs to be true or false. So it makes sense what Excel does. You need a true-false value. Well, this returns a true-false value. And then you can return something if it's true and return something if it's false. So that is all I wanted to show you with this function, the AND function. And again, I want to remind you that what I'm doing here is going through all the logical functions and all the other functions, and I'm going to put them in here in Excel just like this. And we're going to work our way through so that you're really going to be an expert at using Microsoft Excel. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to save this file, and you could take a look at it. You could play around with this dummy data here if you need to practice, if you have an interview, or if you just want to see how these formulas are working. And one other thing is, remember, to summarize the video, is that go to the formula tab here, and this is where you can see all the categories of functions. Right now we're working on this logical we're working under this logical category, and here are the functions, the logical functions. So if you want to get a step ahead, you could start going through these things, and remember, you could click on it, and if you need more help, click on this little link here and it'll show you some examples. But you could always continue to watch these videos, and you'll see real world examples of how I use them. So again, I'm going to post this file on Excel VBA and again, if you want to learn Excel and VBA, which is the automation portion of Excel, the advanced part, you can go here and you could do that for absolutely free. So put your email in here if you want to receive an email when new videos go up. Okay guys, email me if you have any questions, and I'll be sure to answer. Okay, bye.